The blazing desert sun burned across the rocky hills of the Holy Land as the mighty Crusader fortress rose above the landscape like an unbreakable giant. Built upon steep cliffs and protected by massive stone walls, the fortress had become the symbol of Crusader power in the region. Watchtowers overlooked every road for miles, and armored knights guarded the gates day and night. Inside the stronghold, soldiers celebrated past victories while priests blessed warriors preparing for future battles. The Crusaders believed no Muslim army could ever conquer the fortress. Its walls had survived countless attacks, and its commanders mocked any enemy who dared approach. Yet far beyond the desert, a new force was gathering strength. Rumors spread through villages and markets that Saladin had united Muslim lands under one banner. Unlike the divided rulers before him, Saladin was building a disciplined army driven by faith, loyalty, and revenge for years of Crusader occupation. His victories against rival kingdoms had already made his name feared across the Middle East. One evening, exhausted scouts galloped toward the fortress gates carrying terrifying news. Saladin's army was marching directly toward them. Thousands of cavalry riders, archers, and hardened warriors were crossing the desert with unstoppable speed. At first, the Crusader commander laughed confidently, believing the fortress could survive any siege. But as smoke from burning villages darkened the distant horizon, fear slowly spread among the defenders. For the first time in years, the mighty fortress no longer felt invincible. At sunrise, the silence of the desert was shattered by the deep thunder of war drums echoing across the valleys. Crusader soldiers rushed onto the fortress walls and stared in disbelief at the terrifying sight before them. Saladin's massive army stretched across the horizon like an endless sea of steel and banners. Thousands of mounted warriors moved through the sands in perfect formation while archers, infantry, and siege engineers prepared for battle. Green flags fluttered beneath the blazing sun as dust clouds rose behind the advancing army. At the center of the forces rode Saladin himself, calm and focused despite the tension of war. Unlike many rulers who led through fear, Saladin inspired loyalty through discipline and faith. His soldiers respected him deeply and trusted his leadership completely. As he studied the towering Crusader fortress from a nearby hill, he understood that attacking the walls directly would cost thousands of lives. Instead, he planned to break the enemy slowly and carefully. The siege began before noon. Huge catapults were rolled into position while Muslim archers unleashed waves of arrows toward the battlements. Massive stones crashed against the walls with thunderous force, shaking towers and sending fragments of rock into the air. The Crusaders fought back fiercely, firing crossbows and pouring burning oil onto attackers below. But Saladin's most dangerous weapon was patience. He ordered his forces to surround the fortress completely, cutting off food, water, and reinforcements. Days turned into weeks as hunger and fear slowly consumed the defenders trapped behind the mighty walls. As the siege dragged on, frustration began spreading through Saladin's camp. Weeks of attacks had damaged parts of the fortress, but the massive walls still stood firm against every assault. Some of Saladin's generals feared the Crusaders could hold out long enough for reinforcements from Europe to arrive. Supplies inside the fortress were growing weaker, yet the defenders continued resisting with desperate determination. Still, Saladin refused to abandon the siege. He believed every fortress, no matter how powerful, had a hidden weakness waiting to be discovered. One cold night, a frightened villager secretly entered the Muslim camp under the cover of darkness. Guards quickly brought the man before Saladin, where he nervously revealed an important secret. Beneath the rocky cliffs below the fortress was an old tunnel built many years earlier for emergency supplies. Most people believed the passage had collapsed long ago, but the villager claimed part of it still remained open. Saladin immediately ordered trusted scouts to investigate the area. Moving silently through the darkness, they searched the cliffs for hours before discovering a narrow entrance buried beneath loose stones and sand. The tunnel was dangerously small, barely wide enough for armored men to crawl through, but it led directly beneath one of the fortress towers. Realizing this could change the entire war, Saladin ordered his engineers to widen the tunnel in complete secrecy while the main army continued attacking the walls as a distraction. Days later, wooden supports inside the tunnel were packed with oil and dry timber. Then, with one command, the fires were lit beneath the fortress itself. The ground trembled violently as flames consumed the wooden supports beneath the fortress tower. A deafening crack echoed across the battlefield, and within seconds, an entire section of the mighty wall collapsed into a cloud of dust and shattered stone. Crusader soldiers standing nearby were thrown from the battlements as screams filled the air. For the first time since the siege began, the unbreakable fortress had been breached. Saladin wasted no time. The moment the walls fell, Muslim war drums thundered across the desert as thousands of warriors charged toward the opening. Archers fired endless volleys over the breach while infantry rushed through the smoke-covered rubble. Crusader knights quickly formed defensive lines among the broken stones, fighting desperately to stop the invasion. The clash of swords, shields, and spears echoed through the fortress streets as the battle turned savage. Dust and smoke filled the air so heavily that many soldiers could barely see who they were fighting. Men slipped on blood-covered stones while wounded warriors cried out from every direction. Fires spread rapidly through wooden buildings after flaming arrows struck rooftops inside the fortress. Thick black smoke climbed high into the sky as chaos consumed the once proud stronghold. Despite the fierce resistance, panic slowly spread among the defenders. Many Crusader soldiers were already weakened by hunger and exhaustion after weeks of siege. Some abandoned their posts while others barricaded themselves inside churches and storage halls. Meanwhile, Saladin personally entered the breached fortress beside his elite guards, inspiring his army to push deeper into the collapsing defenses. The Crusaders realized their greatest fortress was finally falling before their eyes. The surviving Crusader knights retreated into the central keep, the final stronghold still standing inside the shattered fortress. Exhausted soldiers leaned against blood-stained walls while wounded men groaned across the stone floors. Outside, the sounds of battle echoed through burning streets as Saladin tightened his grip over the fortress. Nearly every tower had fallen, and Muslim banners now waved where Crusader flags once stood proudly. Inside the keep, the Crusader commander gathered his remaining warriors for one final stand. His armor was dented and covered in dust, yet he tried to inspire courage among his men. He spoke of honor, faith, and the glory of dying as defenders of Christendom. Though fear filled the room, many knights raised their swords and prepared themselves for battle rather than surrender. Outside the gates, Saladin offered mercy one last time. Messengers carrying white flags approached the keep and promised protection for civilians and fair treatment for prisoners if the defenders surrendered peacefully. But the Crusader commander rejected the offer, believing surrender would forever shame their kingdom. At dawn, the final assault began. Muslim catapults pounded the keep walls while archers fired endless arrows into narrow windows above. The defenders fought desperately, throwing stones and firing crossbows down onto attackers below. But hunger, exhaustion, and overwhelming numbers had broken their strength. Finally, the gates burst apart with a thunderous crash. Saladin's elite warriors stormed into the keep as brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted in the narrow corridors. One by one, the remaining Crusader knights fell. After months of resistance, the mighty fortress was finally lost forever.